You're listening to Music Mythology. My name is Sam Romo, and let's talk about some music.
It was really funny. He was a nice guy, real nice guy. He does the radio for the Seattle Mariners now. I mean, it's like a big deal.
Dang.
So,
Upgrade.
yeah, he got called up to the majors.
All right. Well, you ready?
I'm ready, man.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Episode 11. Sam Romo sitting down with my buddy Ben. Going to talk about Led Zeppelin, particularly the early days and the first album is the focus today. I guess I'll just start off with when it was released. It was released January 12th in 1969. That's in the U.S. And it was released towards the end of March in the U.K. The most interesting thing that I thought just from the beginning is from reading that book. Oh my gosh, what was it called?
When Giants Walk the Earth.
Giants Walk the Earth. I learned more of, clearly you learn more of their beginnings and everything about them from a book like that. But it was, I better understood like John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page, like way better, like understanding, because I of all of them, I had more familiarity with Page just because of the Yardbirds.
Sure.
But, understanding their mentality at the time, they were both, session musicians, in bands, in and out of band, and they'd kind of gone through the circuit, and they were wanting something new. They were wanting to just do something without having to have a huge critical success. Maybe they just wanted to do something that they liked. And so like with this album, like they didn't even release. I knew like they didn't release a single when they first released it in the US. It wasn't until they released in the UK that they decided to do it, and Jimmy Page didn't even want to do it kind of originally, which I thought that was interesting. But I felt the reason why I bring it up in the beginning is I feel like it kind of sets the tone of their mentality of like, we want to push stuff out, we want to make something new, but maybe not keeping in line with the normal dynamics that we've been accustomed to. Because I mean, at that time it was 1969. I mean, they've been doing it for a decade, or so.
Yeah. And a lot of the releasing a single, a lot of that was pressure from their label in the UK. And I know Page was against it. Peter Grant, their manager, was against it, and they kind of caved. And, they didn't go into this in When Giants Walk the Earth, but I always thought the idea to release Good Times, Bad Times as the lead single was kind of funny, because that was the most unique song on the album. I mean, that sound had not really been done too much before. So I always thought it was kind of a slight middle finger, like, okay, we'll give you a single, but it's going to be something completely different that's not really been heard of on the radio before.
Yeah. Well, and I was also considering that too, of why they picked those two. Because Good Times, Bad Times, the chorus, I feel like has the most, it's the catchiest one. It's the one that you could sing, you could actually, it won't just be subtly stuck in your head. It's like, that's a very catchy.
Yeah, it can be chorus. An earworm.
Yes. But the others, they're either slower, they're covers, they're blues, they're just slower, or they're more, they're probably not as commercially warm because they're like Dazed and Confused, it's psychedelic or it's sexual, and maybe they didn't think that was the time, especially for first album, first swing at things. Like let's keep it with the good times. Let's keep it with the high energy stuff and the rock, because. Yeah, I know. That's very high energy. It is. It's a great beginning too. It's like, because it sets the tone of what's different. It's like we're not just a slow crawl blues band. We're not a thrasher band. It's like we're a little bit of it all. We like they have the blues foundation, but they have the high energy guitar and the high energy vocal. And one other thing going into this album. That I really appreciate is how it's been produced, about how when you listen to it, you can hear every part super clear. I mean, especially the bass. That's probably my most impressive thing out of how it's been mixed, is no matter what. So you can find John Paul Jones like audibly, like at any point. So it's very well mixed. It's very even, but being very just high energy and vibrant. I don't
I completely agree. And I think that Jimmy Page having that background with John Paul Jones, kind of seeing him in studios, playing on other people's stuff with him in sessions, and knowing how talented that John Paul Jones was, not just on bass, but I mean, on anything that can possibly have music come from it.
Right.
I think Jimmy Page having such a heavy hand in the production and knowing what he had in John Paul Jones really led to that, where he knew he could safely accentuate the bass because it was going to be so flawless. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. That's true.
And you know, if, of course, since it's you and me, we got to bring the Beatles into it somehow, right? But, you know, even the early Beatles albums, now granted, the technology was a little bit different because it was still mostly 4-track.
Right.
But, you know, Paul's bass gets lost. In a lot of the, I mean, really up through Rubber Soul.
Yeah.
It's hard to pick out. And I mean, I swear they either didn't have a mic on Ringo's kick drum or they didn't, or maybe he just wasn't using it. But I think they did a great job on Led Zeppelin 1 in allowing everyone kind of their moments to shine in each song just through the way everything was mic'd and produced and put together.
Well, and I think you're also seeing the concept of a musician setting up the concept. You have a full-fledged experienced musician who's been in the studios, been in the clubs, been in the houses jamming, he's been on his own, everything, and now he's been through it and he's ready to, I don't want to deal with the regular dynamics. I want something new. And but more than that, he wants something different, and different, I guess, to a musician, it's always going to be a next level of complexity.
Right.
So I think to him, the next level of complexity isn't what does the listener want to hear? It's what is me, an experienced musician, what would I find absolutely nuts? Because at this point, you have people playing instruments backwards on tape. You got all sorts of new instruments incorporated from other cultures. But what's next? You know, what's going to be prime, you know, next level for a true musician at this point? And I feel like that's what it is. You become an audiophile. You become obsessed with being perfect. And I think that's the next level of producing the next type of quality of music is you give every musician a clear voice in the song. You know, and like him, if he's the lead guitarist and he wants a strong beat and he wants a strong backbone to the song, which is going to be the bass. So he wants that bass man to be strong. He wants him to be pronounced. And he wants him to be the heart of the song, and it can't just get washed away. You know, and what you were just saying, you know, some of it might have been old technology or an older preference for music. I don't want so much bass in my song.
Right.
I don't want that. And especially nowadays, that's foundation. That's needed.
Absolutely.
But I think this is kind of the beginnings of someone with a next level ear introducing that and be like, no, the bass needs to pop. You know, that needs to shine more. And like what I've seen in interviews and the documentaries on Zeppelin, is that's how a lot of people describe their style anyways, is they were one-upping each other.
Right.
And it's like, you know, I'll do a killer, you know, solo, and then you howl and yell in the background like no one's ever heard, and then you know, Bonzo go nuts in the background. And but it's like but that's what I mean, is like when you get good, you try to become great.
Right.
And the best way you do that is you push yourself. You have 4 great musicians and a musician like Page and John Paul Jones that super experienced and are ready to produce and produce things differently. I think this is that next level of potential. And then with technology improving, this is 69. I mean, like we were just talking about the Beatles, I mean, you also, I know Paul was more involved by the later ends.
Right.
So yeah, it might make more sense that the bass is easier to hear. But I mean, you listen to like Come Together or She's So, I Want You, She's So Heavy. It's like you can hear it and it's like crawling in the background, or you know, it's super fast and weird and funky. And it gets better. So yeah, I don't know, preference or technology, but either way, the way Page was wanting it to be mixed, or the way that I mean, I'm sure John Paul Jones had a voice in it too.
Oh yeah.
Of wanting to hear himself and it be a full part of the song. I don't know. It's just definitely stood out to me that it wasn't just a wash. It wasn't just like a wall of sound. I mean, you could pick apart the bricks in that wall, and really focus on the parts of it. I don't know. I definitely appreciate that about how their music's produced.
Yeah, and I to kind of piggyback off the technology argument, what had been happening when 8-track and even 16-track technology came around, people were using that to create new noises, like playing stuff backwards and that kind of thing. And I think it took exactly what you were saying, Jimmy Page, someone who is a musician who knows what he wants. It took him to use that technology to just make the old sound more prevalent. It wasn't a ground. I mean, it's a groundbreaking idea that shouldn't have been, right. Like it shouldn't have taken that to realize that, having the drums on its own track, having the bass on its own track, and having it mixed in a way to where you can hear them and just pick it out. Right. I mean, if you look at Good Times, Bad Times, half the fun in that song is listening to the kick drum. I mean, Bonham was playing it with 1 foot. I mean, he was heel toeing, so it's fast. But I mean, it sounds like a machine gun. Yeah, it sounds like audio. I mean, it seriously sounds like the gun noises from a World War II movie. That had been,
and it's not a double bass pedal.
No, either. It's not. I mean, he was just so fast. It's so crazy. The most talented thing in Led Zeppelin was probably Bonham's right foot. I mean, it's not to take away from anyone else, but it's just insane. And then again, kind of piggybacking on what you were saying, I had a coach growing up who said that to get good, you only have to imitate, but to be great, you have to create. And, and you and I both know this because we've seen a million concerts and listened to a million songs. You can hear covers of songs that are incredibly well done, but it's kind of an easier well done to get to, right, than if you're on the cusp, on the cutting edge of something, and are able to create something brand new. And I think this album had a perfect balance of that, especially for a debut album, in that they did have some of the new stuff like the beat and that kind of stuff in Good Times, Bad Times. But, even using the, as my dad would say, fiddle bow on the Telecaster in Dazed and Confused and a couple other songs. Yeah. People had done that, but I don't think it had been put to tape yet at the point. And so, and that's a creative thing that, not for everyone, and it doesn't apply in a lot of other genres of music. And I'm sure somewhere there's a cellist that's rolling over in their grave thinking about it. But it was something new, and they had the gumption to put it on a record, and it was great. I mean, it really set the tone. I mean, you said it earlier, but this album set the tone for so much about Led Zeppelin, not only in the sound, but in the production and the management, all of that. I mean, and it's cool. Yeah. It's just cool. Yeah. Well, and
the fact that the band was, a majority of the band was so experienced. I mean, that's why because it's like, I can't remember who said it. I don't know if it was Zig Ziglar or what, but it's like that classic quote where it's like, before you can invent, you have to master the foundations first or whatever. And I mean, you just said something similar, but I mean, they've already done that. And just like Hendrix, being a part of a band, I mean, he was with Little Richard, and he was over it and Little Richard was over him because he could tell, because he was erupting on stage. You're like, hey man, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. I'm the centerpiece. What's going on here? And because that's what you start to bust out. You start to bust out of your lane because you've done it all, or you feel like you've done it all. And I think that it is the big characteristic to their personality of invention at the time, is that it wasn't just, we know what we're doing, so we can churn out anything that would be half good or considered good to a normal person. It was what would impress the musicians, what would just blow people's minds. And so like, yeah, it's like there's all sorts of weird things at the time. You're at the late 60s. That's when it was like the height of musical experimentation. but yeah, using a violin bow with like a wah-wah and different distortions to make it sound like it's moaning, it's groaning, it's a background howl. It's I think he even put like echoes in reverse, just to make those things just so unearthly and so, just make you ponder what's going on in the song, because you can understand it just by, feeling by like what, because like in a horror movie, the creaking of a bow or, and it's supposed to make you so uneasy. Yeah, that's what it's projecting. It's
Right.
It's a palpable feeling that he's communicating with. But I think that just like with Hendrix, Page, that's what he had become, is he was just a master communicator in a different way. It's like you might be great at singing, speaking, making a speech. I know music, and I know how to turn it upside down, inside out, invert it, flip it over, put it in another dimension, bring it backwards. and that's what I'm going to do today. And I want to do something that's going to melt your face while I melt my finger, and that's what, good times, bad times. That's a great opener, is because you get that great balance and understanding of the band, but Page still cuts through with that finger melting guitar.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, this isn't your Yardbirds bag. This isn't even Hendrix. This is for people focused and they have a plan, but then you have musicians that are just killer. I don't know. It's not controversial to say that they were phenomenal, but when you listen to it, and you might think, you could be told the guitar solo is coming up, but then when you hear it, it's so fast, it's so swift and accurate and killer and or aggressive or palpable in just a primal, like an intense way. But it's just, I don't know, it just definitely sets the tone that this isn't your typical 60s rock. This is, cutting edge or something different, but still respecting the boundaries kind of blues rock and those foundations and folk.
Right. And I think a lot of that, it makes it more impressive because they recorded this album relatively quickly.
Right.
There was only 36 total hours of studio time spread over a few weeks, but like the Dazed and Confused that made the album, that was 2 takes. I mean, that was the second take is the one they used. And it's 7 minutes of weirdness that they completely nailed the second time through.
Wow.
And that, and I'm, it had to be mixed and everything,
Sure.
but I mean, even still.
Yeah.
And, you hear stories, and I think one thing that held, a name that we're going to hear more later, but something that held Jeff Beck back from becoming Jimmy Page, as far as career trajectory.
Right.
I mean, as guitarists, they're evenly matched, I would say. But, Jeff Beck was such a perfectionist. He would spend hours and hours and hours and hours in the studio just doing every single song. And later in the 70s, he was almost becoming Peter Gabriel, where it was taking him 200 hours of studio time to get an 8-track album out. And I think that also, I mean, again, kind of getting ahead of myself here, but I think that led to some tensions in the Yardbirds as well. The kind of the personal relationship between Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page.
Oh, I'm sure.
I almost said Jimi Hendrix.
Well, I'm sure. Well, and because you already had a good amount of personality in the Yardbirds.
Oh, yeah.
And then when they got success and commercial success and then experimental success, it's like, it was like the Beatles during the White Album period. It's like, all right, we're on a new kind of wave, and I either divvy off and go do my own thing because we're clearly a little bit different, from each other. Because it's like Jimmy Page is his own personality, Clapton's his own personality, Beck's his own personality. They got their own styles. One's a little more intense, one's a little more down the middle, one's a little slower, but it's all a little different. And I'm sure they all work different, and so. And who knows what was going on, but but at that point, and we'll definitely bring Beck back up. Well, Well, I guess you want to get to the next one. Because I mean, we'll definitely get back to Beck, but it's yeah, I don't know what else to say. Because he came out with an album first,
right?
That's what I was trying to think of. Yeah, Truth. Which and I'll touch back on that one towards the end of the album. But yeah, like Beck was the first one to put out something of his own, which included a lot of other people, people from Faces,
including John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones played bass,
and Page,
and Jimmy Page played,
Page right?
Yeah,
Beck's
Bolero,
yeah, which he incorporated back into this album too,
right. As an aside, by the way, I happen to be a very big Rod Stewart fan.
Okay,
go figure, right? And my mom and my aunt both love Rod Stewart. So I was brought up with, Maggie May and Do You Think I'm Sexy and Hot Legs and that kind of stuff. And in preparing for this, I went ahead and listened to Truth all the way through. And I had forgotten how good Rod Stewart was when he was still a rock and roll guy and not such a pop rock
person.
Guy.
Yeah, right.
And
the Faces.
Oh, yeah.
Period, yeah.
Yeah, with because I think he did 2 albums with Jeff Beck Group and then, a handful with Faces and then kind of did his own thing. And, I mean, that dude's got some pipes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a little brief Rod Stewart appreciation moment. Yeah. That's all. Before the pink jumpsuits and feathered hair.
Before the 70s got him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, before the cocaine and disco balls took over. But and one thing I did want to mention quickly is something about this album. And this, again, we can kind of sprinkle this in as we go too. But Led Zeppelin toured, of course, when they released the album, and they did tour the U.S. And I think they were able to handle it better because Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones had both toured the U.S. before. But, them touring, and I know that you're going to say like, well, duh, that's why people tour. But them touring did lead to a heavily increased album sales. Again, duh. But, the whole thing is because, this album got pretty mixed reviews from the regular critics. But when people learned how good and how explosive they were live, that shot the record sales up. But it also meant that they were one of the first bands to make a ton of money touring right from the get-go. Even the Beatles, it was kind of a little bit of a break even maybe those first couple of tours. But I mean, right from the first pitch, I mean, Zeppelin was really making a lot of money touring because they were so electric live. And that's something I just thought was cool. And I don't know if they could have done that if Jimmy Page didn't already have that experience.
Right.
Because, Plant and Bonham both especially had never really done that.
Right.
And in When Giants Walk the Earth, it talks about the nerves. I would like to think that's why they did the drugs, although I know that's not it. But, I think having kind of the calm, cool, collected level-headedness of John Paul Jones and then the experience of handling tour life from Jimmy Page probably helped Bonham and Plant, come back down to earth more easily.
I imagine it's kind of like the aggressive dedication of like Lennon and the Beatles, but then you have a calm George who knows music theory in the beginning better than all of them and kind of knows what he's about, but not necessarily. But because I think that's a dynamic you need in a group, especially a group that's together all the time, working constantly. Right. You need someone that's the driving force with experience. You need someone that's calm with experience, and you need someone that's dedicated to working for writing. I mean, it's all interchangeable and mixable, but I feel like those two dynamics are really key in a really healthy band or healthy group. Is you have someone you have two sides of the brain. You have the side that they're both really aware, smart, and dynamic in in making music, but you have one that's, constantly want to push to what's possible, and the other one that's, keeping it in a healthy framework. I don't know. I just feel like it's a certain respect you have to have, about where you're going versus where you are. And self-awareness, as a musician.
You almost have to think of it like if you were putting a team together for a bank heist or something. Like,
right.
Everyone kind of has a role.
Yeah.
And I think I think they nailed it. Other bands not always successful at that, right? I mean, you hear horror stories about people hating each other at the end of tours and that kind of stuff. And
egos going crazy.
Oh yeah. And Zeppelin, I think, weathered the storm well. I don't know. Could it have gone beyond after John Bonham died? I don't know. But at least for the touring part of it from the late 60s through the 1977 tour, I think that they handled each other about as well as a band could be expected to. Is that book, when Giants Walk the Earth, it obviously didn't hold anything back, talking about the antics on the road and that kind of stuff. Right. And so you think if there had been fist fights and drinks being thrown at each other and a lot of animosity, that it would have been brought up. And I think its absence says a lot.
Right. Well, yeah. And I watched a couple of documentaries with interviews with them and roadies and people that they were friends with. And they said, that legacy of them being, just chaos in the road and bringing, the rock and roll, dramatic, explosion to your town, whatever, wrecking everything in their sight. A lot of that was like Telephone was a legacy of what they could do, or maybe what they did at one point, but then some of them, they said like after a while and they got used to it, it's like sometimes they wouldn't be an after party. They would just end the show and go have tea, but sometimes they were crazy. So, it's just different eras, different times. And I'm sure there's just a lot of influences everywhere they went. But yeah, I was also, I didn't look into this, but was it normal for an album to be released in America before UK when it was a UK group?
Not really. And the one thing that came with that is that, Peter Grant, their manager, insisted on negotiating their own distribution deal with an American label in America. And so the album was released on Atlantic in America, and Atlantic had a long history of really bringing new and kind of groundbreaking artists to the forefront. And I always think of Ray Charles. He was an early Atlantic signing. Yeah, because I had read about the earlier years of the label and how what made them different was that their scouts, or I can't remember their names, but the two people at the time that were primarily in charge of Turkish brothers is what they were, brothers of Turkish descent.
But like they were given, they didn't have to get things approved. It's like if they found a talent and they were convinced by their ear that they had potential, then they would do it. They made the deals, and that their deals had higher royalty percentages than the typical deals at the time. Like when it would be a maximum royalty of like 5% or something like that, they were doing like 7 to 9%.
Right.
So yeah, I'd read about that, but that was like a unique thing about that label at the time.
Yeah, and a lot of British bands normally tried to stick with a British label, right, even to handle the American distribution. And that's why if you look, a lot of times with British bands, either the album was released much earlier in the UK, or it was released only in the UK, and then there was some comparable but differently named album that was released in the United States. You said with the Beatles.
Yeah,
again,
the Beatles. Yeah.
You think, Beatles 6 was something that was a thing in the United States and not a thing in the UK.
Yeah. Or it's like Meet the Beatles in America was totally different than the original in the UK. Yeah.
So it's crazy, but they insisted on negotiating their own distribution with Atlantic, and it worked out well.
I do remember, I think it was in the book that Grant or someone mentioned, maybe it was Page, that they knew like a cue to them of success, like mass success and commercial financial success was America. Like you make it in the UK, that's cool, but if you make it in America, you're golden. So I imagine that was probably a priority too, is kind of belittling their immediate market because we can get it over. It's kind of like if we can get someone across the pond to like it, then they're probably going to love it here. So
Right.
why worry as much? Maybe that was the 4D chess move that they're trying to make.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some joke in there about the U.S. bailing England out of World War II or something like that. But no, it's just fascinating, and I like the business side of it just because that's a little bit. I mean, not massive U.S. tours or anything, but I am a lawyer, and most of what I do is business related, and so I get fascinated about the contracts and the distribution list. But
why didn't he sue him?
I know, right? Oh yeah, no, there'll be plenty of lawsuits to talk about.
Well, you want to get to the next track?
Yeah, let's do it.
Next one is "Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You." This one, it's got that slow acoustic buildup, along with the vocal buildup. The calmer bluesy voice, and then getting into like more of a howl towards the end.
Right.
It's a great song, classic song. It's another good showcase of Page's multi-guitar or really production mind of
Right.
I'm not just going to be satisfied with one guitar, maybe switching to different measures for the whole composition of the song. I'm going to switch to a guitar with a slide. I'm going to switch to all the things we talked about, a guitar with a bow. But with this one, it's just acoustic to. I think this one might have a mandolin or something, or maybe it's just a different key of the acoustics in.
I think it almost sounds like it's capoed on like the 9th fret or something like that at one point. It's way up the neck.
Yeah, but it's multiple. It's just a variety of guitars on this one, which is nice. It gives it a lot of depth because it not only just builds up, but then once it builds up and erupts, you have a variety of instrumentation and guitar, changes.
Right. And, we mentioned that there would be more lawsuits. So, Babe, I'm Going to Leave You. There was a little bit of a miscommunication is what it was, because Joan Baez had recorded it first.
Right.
And from what I understand, Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones both liked Joan Baez's version, and that's in that acoustic buildup at the beginning. It's a folky chord progression,
right?
And so you can hear the kind of Joan Baez folk, whatever,
right?
But on the Baez album, it said it was a traditional arrangement. The problem is the song was actually written by a woman named Anne Breeden. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Bredon. And she was not given credit originally because Zeppelin just said it was a traditional arrangement. So I can't recall if Anne Breeden filed an actual lawsuit or if there was just, some sort of letter sent to Zepp's management. But eventually on re-releases, even as early as the 70s, you started seeing, traditional and Anne Breeden arranged by Jimmy Page or whatever.
Interesting.
And so now in 1990 is when the official change to the song credit happened. And every reissue since 1990 is credited to Breeden, Page, and Plant.
Huh.
So they're the 2 tracks in. We already got arguments over who wrote what.
Well, and it's kind of interesting too that they didn't just go ahead and give even a partial credit. I mean, however you would do that at the time. I mean, now digitally it's a little easier to document that kind of thing.
Right.
But just because I'm trying to think, almost every artist that on their early albums, I mean, Bowie, Hendrix, the Beatles, they covered people.
Oh, sure.
And then gave them the credit. Like, it's not my song, but I love that song.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them did that. So I don't know. Was it just a cocky thing? Was it we don't really care? Because like I was saying before, was that the mentality? Like, let's just make something. Let's mix it up. Let's just have fun and enjoy it and do what we want to do. And maybe just kind of throw away the normal, and be a little more devil may care, be a little more just whatever kind of, if it comes back to us, who knows?
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just kind of odd because it's not like that wasn't typical.
Oh, yeah.
But why not just own it? Yeah, I don't know.
And especially with Plant and Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones, who had done enough studio work and session work to know that it's important to give credit where credit is due. Yeah. And then the great irony of it all is that since John Bonham died, especially, Led Zeppelin has been so stingy and so picky about who they license their songs to.
Oh, right.
The movie Dazed and Confused couldn't use the Zeppelin song because Zeppelin didn't allow it.
Wow.
And even like if you have an Amazon Echo and you say, Alexa, play Dazed and Confused, it's not available. It's only available through premium. And if you go back and watch movies, you can think of some that have Zeppelin songs. Silver Linings Playbook has a great kind of interlude with what is and what should never be.
But it costs like $1 billion.
But yeah, it's very expensive.
Well, like the Beatles. But because like I don't remember who I was talking about this with. But like if you go on Rock Band, because like I grew up with Rock Band in my generation. But I could always tell what artist was the really expensive licensed artists because they were never on those games.
Right.
And you're like, oh, what about that song? They have, Stairway to Heaven. They have When the Levee Breaks. Like, hell no. Like, no, they couldn't afford that crap. That's why it was such a big deal when Beatles Rock Band came out. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, Danny Harrison is like actually leaning up on it and help, they want to make it happen. And then they made it and it was like phenomenal. And they had every Beatles song on it. But it's like, yeah, Zeppelin's the other one where it's like it's got to be crazy expensive.
Yeah, and it's. I can tell you. Here's the frame of reference that I have. There's an episode of The Office, if you're an Office fan, where Michael sings a little bit of 2 Tickets to Paradise, the Eddie Money song. That license to use that little bit that Michael sang, they didn't even play the song. They just that one little that cost $60,000. Wow. 60,000 United States dollars.
That's nuts. Well, isn't it like any actual form of usage of like a Beatles song in a commercial or in a movie or whatever commercially used media? It's like $1 million. Like there's some kind of like minimum
it's
rate
something insane. And that's that's what I mean. I'm not putting down Eddie Money. I mean, I have whatever. I like Eddie Money sometimes.
But I get what you mean.
But if Eddie Money's pulling $60,000 for someone just singing along to his song, imagine what Zeppelin and the Beatles and people who are way are going to be remembered as larger figures in music. Again, nothing against Eddie Money.
Well, maybe that hard line approach also came from them being worn out of having the battle with their own stuff, but they could have just given credit and not dealt with that. That's very funny. It's very interesting, like back and forth double like problem of theirs. It's like we won't copy your stuff, just stop copying others. Like, well, we did that 50 years ago, so give us our money. You have anything else on this one?
I don't think I've got anything else on Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. No.
Yeah, it's a good one. The next track is You Shook Me. This one's written by Willie Dixon. Willie wrote a lot of classic blues songs that a lot of people are probably familiar with, like Hoochie Coochie Mane for Muddy Waters. You have Backdoor Man.
Backdoor Man, which I normally don't like when the West Coast American kind of white boy bands do covers of those kinds of songs, but I do like the Doors version of Backdoor Man.
Yeah. Morrison's dramatic singing adds to it for sure. I found out that he has an album. Willie Dixon has an album called I Am the Blues.
I've got it on vinyl, man.
Nice.
Yeah, I need to show you my collection sometime.
Yeah, it's cool where it collects all the songs that you're probably familiar with, but you didn't know that he wrote. Same with that. There's another album that we talked about that was like that. The guy that wrote a lot of Elvis's songs.
Yeah,
I forget his name.
I'm blanking on it too. I can't remember who wrote Reconsider Baby. I know. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate because I don't want to be wrong. But yeah, so You Shook Me, like you said, written for Willie Dixon. It was actually written for Muddy Waters.
It's Otis Blackwell.
Yeah, okay.
That's the Elvis guy.
That makes sense. So You Shook Me, it has another element. And by the way, credit where credit is due. Led Zeppelin did properly credit Willie Dixon on this one, which is nice.
Well
so they avoided litigation there. But there was kind of another level of pseudo plagiarism because bringing Jeff Beck back into this fray. In Truth, which was released in July of 68, I believe. And like you said, this was January of 69. And but Jeff Beck had a version on Truth with Rod Stewart on lead vocals. Yeah. And the arrangement is pretty similar. Yeah. I mean, and even, I mean, John Paul Jones played the organ on Jeff Beck's version and played the organ on Zeppelin's version. Wow. And if you listen to it, and you know, that's one thing that got reviewers mad because people reviewing Led Zeppelin 1 inevitably, and I mean, you can't blame them, right? But they inevitably compared it to Truth. Yeah. And Jeff Beck was upset with Jimmy Page.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's pissed.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I don't blame him too much. I mean, because even though the song's a cover, it's still, the arrangement is something of a personal touch, and Zeppelin did take it.
It's also, this wasn't like a scenario with the Beatles where like they would, you know, it's the Yardbirds super group, whatever. You have a lot of people, I'm sure, coming up with their own stuff, keeping it to themselves, but they didn't have a label together.
Right.
You know, it's like when the Beatles had Apple Records. I mean, it just kind of, you could work on your stuff together, but you kind of didn't know if you wanted to present it because then it became the businesses.
Right.
And so with them, I'm sure it was much easier to jack this. That's cool. Yeah, I'll do that with you this week, and next week I'm going to do it with Plant. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're much easier to slide into that easier because there's nothing on paper here. It's like, if you do it, we'll do it. But hey, I helped you with that, so I'm going to give it to myself too. Just give me a year and we'll do it again.
I agree. It's a weird dynamic. I do love this song. It's one of my favorites on the album. There's a great version, maybe even two versions on their BBC Sessions album.
Oh, right.
And
which that's a great album.
Oh, it is. It's so good.
That black and white one.
Right.
Yeah, that one's good one.
All three versions of Communication Breakdown are neat. But You Shook Me, and that was one that was an early staple of concerts that allowed for a lot of improvisation.
Oh, really?
I was kind of on a deep dive over the past couple of days, and I wish I could find a sound. All I could find is someone talking about it, but you know, apparently John Paul Jones would take bass solos, which had to be pretty unusual.
Oh, wow.
When you're surrounded by that kind of firepower normally. But
well, again, I mean, especially, I think that's huge to their dynamic is that they're all so good that they all gave each other time to belt. You know, it's like, because it's like you can go nuts, but then I'm next in line, buddy. Like, you know, there's no like. You're the wild card. You do the solo, and I'll just keep timing. And it's like, no, I'm going to keep timing. And then once you're done with your thing, I'm going to go nuts too. You know, it's like everybody had their thing. So it's like surprising, but not whenever, you know, Bonham has a 5-minute drum solo where you can't keep up with what's doing what. And then, and John Paul Jones in the same light would have a bass break or something like that. It just makes sense because again, that's what they seem to be, is like the musician. It's like, I know you like this, so let's single it out and crank it up. You know, it's like they were like really unapologetic about that. And it's like, you might want a 3-minute blues song. We're going to give you a 7-minute blues song with like 3 blues songs in it. You know, it's like because it's like that's what they wanted. You know, that was energizing to their ear. So it's like, I love that. Let's keep it going. You know, and me as a musician, and especially as a musician that likes to just create and jam, you know, that's huge. That's why I love jazz albums, because a lot of them do have long running songs that there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of variety in it. And it's like, that's what they wanted. They wanted variable madness in a clean, in a presentable rock form that was like, you know, you get what we're going for, but we're going to take it to another level and run it. Right. Even longer, you know,
and you know, like really on the nose, especially if you listen to early Sonny Rollins albums, speaking of jazz, Sonny Rollins, great saxophonist, a Mohawk pioneer. It's like if you find pictures of him from the 50s, he had a Mohawk. It's hilarious.
Wow, really?
But he played a lot of, and jazz and blues, there's a lot of crossover. And Sonny Rollins had a lot of good covers of blues-based jazz songs that he had. And if you listen to the early Sonny Rollins albums, it has a very similar dynamic to this. And the last thing I have really to say about You Shook Me is one of my favorite things about it is it's the first introduction that Led Zeppelin fans would get to vocals mimicking the guitar.
Yes, and that's because I have a few more notes, and that was one of the ones that I have right here is the paralleled vocal to guitar accompaniment, that the guitar wasn't just a part of the song, it was like an ad lib, or it was an accompanying vocal. It was a part of the song, and it's not just and they would do that in the shows. That was one of their things, that between Plant and Page, that Page would riff off of what he was playing, and then he would howl and make noises, and the noise they would match each other in tone and in length,
right?
To give you that interesting connection that's not always expected. Maybe it is at certain little moments in the song, but yeah, they had a habit of keeping that up. Of, if we're gonna have a little break here and you're gonna do some moaning for a solid minute, I'm just gonna do what you're doing too, and it'll just like doubling up on a guitar overdub. It's like let's add the guitar over it, but I'm not gonna do like little stuff in the background. It's like I'm gonna just do what you're doing, add a layer to it, and it's definitely unique. And I don't remember, they do it more for sure, but this is like, to me, this is the first look at their foundations and of what they're about. The blues roots, the slow, because they master that slow crawling beat. And great blues vocals. You got what else on this one? You got John Paul Jones on the organ again. A killer harmonica solo.
Great harmonica solo.
And that's rare for me to say. I like harmonica, but it's got to be used really, really well, and
in doses.
And in doses, yes, absolutely. You can't just bust out and move it around and expect that to be amazing. It's like, this is,
I'm with you.
Very careful, good timing, and this song, it's like a prime example of late 60s blues rock.
It is,
because you have every type of instrument you would expect. There's a guitar, a smoky vocal, an organ, a harmonica, and then again that slow crawling beat with the bass and the drum.
Just hitting perfect. The bejesus out of those drum skins, but in a perfect and controlled way.
Yeah.
But John Paul, John Bonham he had one speed, right? He hit the drums as hard as he could every single time. And it's perfect. It makes it work.
Yeah.
And this is one of those, because the beat he plays, this is one of those moments where someone as prolific as John Bonham holding back makes you appreciate how good they are even more. Because he could have gone nuts, but he played a beat that's simpler than a lot of other beats that he played, especially as the band aged. But it fit the song just perfectly.
Yeah.
And good musicians, I think the best musicians, play what is needed for the song to be successful.
Yes. They can control themselves.
Exactly. And John Bonham showed a reservation in his drumming in here that he failed to show in other parts of his life. But but it's great.
Well, and this song was the first song, because I've heard a lot of Zeppelin tracks throughout my life, but I've never there's never been someone in my life that's like, you gotta listen to House of the Holy all the way through. It's an experience. I never had someone that walked me through it or did anything like that. So, reading that book, watching some documentaries, watching some concerts, and listening to this album and the second one, but primarily this one, just to be ready for the show, in order all the way through multiple times. there's a lot of songs on this album I'd never heard before, just because maybe I have listened to this album before, but it's fleeting. If I didn't keep it in circulation, especially because I just listen to so much different stuff all the time.
You and me both.
Yeah. So it's like, if I want to, put it to memory, if it stands out to me, it's like, yeah, I'll cycle that thing through multiple times and it'll get stuck in my brain. But I just never did it with this band. There's so much music, so,
right.
And that's what the part of the show is me, queuing myself up to, focus and learn more. But in experiencing Zeppelin in this, approach that I hadn't done before, this is what we were talking about a little bit before the show, was that prior to that, when I thought Zeppelin, I really thought Zeppelin 4.
Oh yeah.
I think they're the height of the rock days.
Oh, absolutely.
And and when you look at comments that people make about people that sound like them, whether you're talking about like Wolf Mother or Greta Van Fleet or whatever, those bands, like the modern bands that are kind of like them, I feel like almost like they build their sound thinking that, like, Zeppelin has this rock concept of what they are, and then they evolved rock, but really they had this respect and foundation in blues,
right,
and then evolved that into a heavier type of blues in that same line that Hendrix was doing. That Hendrix did the same thing. He grew up on that blues. He loved that American blues and literally turned it upside down and started just doing things to it that just hadn't been done before, but we're still in the same structures, but just totally different. And then by the end of his career, it's like, you want to call that blues, but it's like, that's where the foundations are. And the same thing with Zeppelin is, You Shook Me is kind of that first introduction of saying, like, yeah, I know we've shown you the good times, the high energy, the rock, and then the slower and the buildup of Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. It's still rock, it's still folkier, but still it's rock. But what You Shook Me, it's like that shakes it all off and brings it back to the core of, like, again, that slow crawl, that bluesy sound, and it's them, like that's the beginning. And for me, as a first time critical, listen and assessment, that was a development for me in my perception of them, is realizing, like, oh, they weren't just the Yardbirds cranking it up and going nuts, and changing it up every album, which is a loose perception I had, but it was much more, blues centric in the beginning, which I don't know, I never really focused on because of the hits that I had been used to. They were always just such high energy and rock. So now I get it much more, like in the documentaries and the books, whenever Page and certain members would get kind of flustered when they would be compared to, like, Black Sabbath, or like throwing in the thrasher metal and heavy metal stuff. It's like, no, like those are folk chords, or that's blues. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
But so it's very interesting. I never had that in my mind when listening to them, and now it's definitely there. It's you can't dismiss it. It's like, once you know it. But it's a great song.
It is.
I love it. I like their version better than the Jeff Beck one, but he has the rights to be mad. I agree.
Right. And I agree. and as much as I do love Rod Stewart, I mean, you can't beat Plant's vocals on this, right? I mean, I love Rod Stewart. I really do. But this is a Plant song.
Yeah, he's got that bluesy vocal that you need.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then next up, Dazed and Confused, which might be my favorite on the album, just because I love how out there it is. All the other songs are, high energy and different and developed very well, produced very well. But this one, it's long. It's got just one break, one long break in the middle. And this is where you have Page using a lot of different effects, using that wah pedal with the bow, and just making his, this is one where they're moaning, where Plant would moan and he would make the same sound, but not just with his hand and his guitar, but with the pedal and with the bow. So it's like this eerie banshee.
Yeah, it's a little ethereal.
Yeah, it's otherworldly, and the way he produces it. I think Page and someone else produced this one. I can't remember, because I know there's another engineer that helped them. But
yeah, there was a guy named Glen something.
Yeah.
But it's Glyn, which I'm assuming is like a Welsh or Gaelic spelling.
But with this one, I was going to say it's longer. He uses a lot of different effects. Man, I just totally blanked on what I was going to mention. But it's, man, I can't believe I forgot what I was going to say.
That's on me. I interrupted you with the Glen. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So I almost turned into an etymology lesson.
But it's just, that's what I was going to say. I remember now. Is also the way it's edited with the panning of the guitars and the panning of those moans is it has dimension to it where, it's not just a band playing and this blues artist vocalist, screaming out and yelling and singing. It's like, think about that. And they're standing on a plane. They're just standing on a level, but it's like adding those effects and stuff into the break. That's when it adds dimension to the song and the panning and stuff like that. I mean, nowadays it's kind of expected,
right.
and you doing that, but the old school methods with tape and just, I don't know.
I mean, doing all this without a computer.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, it's a more complex, it's a more dynamic song than even You Shook Me, which, as great a song as it is a lot more static than this.
Right.
And that's, it's good that they have the kind of diversity of that on the album, but I'm with you. It's a great song. This is another one that, was the subject of a lawsuit, though.
Yeah, with the Jack Holmes.
Yes.
Or Jake Holmes.
Jake Holmes. So originally written by Jake Holmes, well, kind of. And did you listen to the Jake Holmes?
Yeah, his version. It's different.
It's different, but I get it.
Yeah. The like main structure of it is pretty similar.
Right.
But yeah, like a lot of the vocal, the lyrics are definitely been swapped out. But yeah, like I had read that this was like, he saw him play him and a couple of the Yardbirds saw him perform it and they really liked it. And then the Yardbirds would perform it, live a few times.
Right.
And it's even on a couple of their live albums that they did it.
And it is kind of the compromise. Again, I'm not going to get too much into it because this is a music show and not a law show. But, one thing that's kind of interesting is the compromise was the credit now says written by Page, inspired by Jake Holmes.
Oh.
And then normally you would see written by Holmes, arranged by Page or whatever. Mm-hmm. But the inspired by Holmes is kind of a weird, that's not something you see very often.
I guess because so much of it is different.
Right. And I think that's what it was, is they could tell that Jimmy Page had tried to change just enough to make it his own, but apparently didn't quite do it enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that makes sense. It's just one of those weird legal things, I'm sure, where there was just a lot of back and forth on how it would be handled. And that's the other thing, too, is at this point in the game, Led Zeppelin's the big name. He's not the big name. Yeah. So they have more clout to throw around than anything. So it's like those smaller artists, I can only imagine that at some point they're just kind of beat down. And it's like, I'd rather get something than nothing. So I'll just, like on a book where if you redo someone's art, how you would sign, your name after whoever.
Right.
It's like, that's your little thing, but that's all you get.
Right.
It's like, you're not getting any of the money because it's my art. It's just weird. But that's why it's nice to have you here, because there's an actual legal opinion in the room, not just like, that sounds stupid.
Yeah. I'm with you. But, this was a concert staple. It was a big crowd pleaser.
Yeah, sometimes 30 minutes long.
Yeah, and even the version that actually ended up on How the West Was Won, which is a great live album of theirs. It's got some breaks where they do other stuff, but it's 25 and a half minutes. And that's the one that made the cut. You think of the ones that were left on the drawing room floor, but and this was played, I believe, at every single concert they did, with the exception of some times during a tour when Jimmy Page had broken a finger. Oh. And there was some part of this song that he couldn't do, so they threw a different song in there. But it was a real crowd pleaser. People got into it.
Yeah.
Page would come out in his crazy jumpsuits and probably like a Stradivarius bow or something like that, and go to town.
I've been with my little band. We've been learning this one, a couple of songs off this album.
Have you?
Yeah, because there's two guitars playing on it. There's a higher register and a lower one, and so that's definitely a part to this song too. Is Jimmy overdubbing and doubling up. Getting very careful and clever, like doing like reverse echoes and weird stuff that you just don't know how to explain if you don't know how it happened. But yeah, like how that song, that crying banshee, that wailing, it's two guitars playing the same things, different octaves or whatever, and it's just like it's so impactful. It's got so much strength behind it. It's a very interesting song, and I've been trying to learn how to play the bow part. I have a bow, so that's been interesting too. This is also like the first Zeppelin song that's on the lyrically, it's on the sexual side, which became the Zeppelin. Because I saw this meme the other day on Reddit where it was like someone made a pie chart of like what Zeppelin songs are about, and it's like 98% of it was like sex, and then 2% was citrus fruit.
Right? Yeah, it's like sex and Lord of the Rings, and then that little 2% is like for Tangerine and the Lemon Song. No, it's a great song, and you're right. The lyrics pretty sexually charged. The soul of a woman was created below. I mean, and they're lyrics that I think more evolved minds such as ours could see as probably coming across as pretty misogynistic, if we're being honest. I don't know if this song had never been recorded until today. I don't know that they could have gotten away with it, if that makes sense a little bit. But it set the table for a lot of ensuing Led Zeppelin stuff, right? I mean,
well, and this song, I don't know, I love blues music.
Oh, I do too,
and I love rock, but I just feel like when it comes to this album and it comes to like them, like their personality, like that's why I feel like this is my favorite one on the album. Right. I mean, it's very unique too, but I just feel like it fits the expectation,
right,
pretty well.
It does.
Got anything else on that one?
Not that I can think of.
That's a good one. Do you know any covers of that song?
I don't.
It's a random thought. It's not planned at all.
The one, so I will talk about this since we're in the subject of covers. I went to college at A&M, Texas A&M, for those of you not listening in Texas. And there used to be a little blues bar in Northgate, which is kind of the bar district down there.
Yeah.
There was a little kind of blues bar that also, I think, sold barbecue. It opened my senior year, and I wasn't around much after that. But they used to have a guy who was kind of the house musician. And his kind of showpiece was towards the end of every night, he would just take requests from the audience. Oh. And if he couldn't figure out how to play it, he would buy them drinks. Oh. And I remember people shouting out the most random, and it didn't matter. Willie Nelson, Steely Dan, whatever. They'd throw it out there, and he would sit there, and sometimes he took a minute to work it out. Yeah. I have a specific memory of him doing Reelin' in the Years by Steely Dan, and it was a lot of before he got to that's going to sound great on the podcast, by the way. Sorry about that, everyone. But, and I can remember someone throwing out Dazed and Confused, and that was the first time I had ever seen that guy be like, oh, okay, I got this. And he clearly already knew how to play it. Yeah. And it was pretty neat. Of course, it didn't have the depth because it was a little 3-piece outfit, but it was pretty cool though. And that's the one cover I know I've heard of it besides what some of the Yardbird stuff, but that's not really technically a cover.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the only thing I'm kind of aware of, because I just tried to look it up again and didn't really see any notable, which kind of surprised me. To me, that's like, because that song, it's very like what you would almost consider like if someone came out with that song today, you'd always be like, that guy sounds like Jack White.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot to that. I mean, because you can hear in this song, I think you can hear the influences on Jack White and on Dan Auerbach from the Black Keys. I think you can hear a lot of that.
Well, I realized very much so, like dissecting this album, like realizing like, man, I did not realize because I like Jack White, but I'm not all in on the guy. Like I don't know every single little bit thing about him and where he came up with his sound. You know, I know where he's from. I know all the outfits he's been with and a lot of his work. I was like, but I respect the guy, but I did not realize like how much he must have like really idolized like Page. You know, like because even like looking at his outfits, the attire that he wore for the White Stripes and stuff like that. It's like the jumpsuit shit that Page would wear. It's hilarious. The black and white stuff, the studded stuff, and looking at the styles, the crazy methods of playing the guitar and the effects and stuff, it is very much in line of taking the cue from Zeppelin, you know, because I know there's also a lot of White Stripe and Jack White stuff that is like Beatles, you know, based, you know, for sure. But I realize now that I think the majority of it comes from Zeppelin. Like
I do too. And I if you watch, oh my goodness, what was it? Was it called? It Might Get Loud. No. Yeah, whatever.
Oh, there's the thing where Page, and White, and the Edge. Yeah.
I'll get on a U2 soapbox a different day, but you know, if you watch that, is it called It Might Get Loud?
I think so.
I think it is too, but now I'm losing confidence in that. But you can tell. I think if you watch it, you can see Jack White being just a little bit starstruck at first, and it's pretty funny to me.
Sometimes he just has that look on his face.
Yeah, that's part of it is I think another way that he's kind of emulating Page is in this, you know, Jack White has this kind of mysteriousness about him. And, you know, with Jimmy Page, it was Aleister Crowley and the occult and all that stupid crap.
But now I get it. Because
I do too.
Because I just never really made that connection, but I could still see them in the same way, but not realize like, oh, you're drawing from that. Like that's like the pale face, long dark hair, and the dark jumpsuit, you know, wailing on your guitar and doing your thing. It's like, oh, I see. You like that guy. Like, you know, it's like, oh, the
one thing I will say about U2 right now, and I'll leave it alone,
is they had no right to give us that album.
Besides that, if you give yourself a nickname like The Edge, I don't know, man. I can't. You know, it's like, I don't know. First off, I don't get people giving themselves their own nicknames. And secondly, if you're going to call yourself The Edge, do something that is so groundbreaking and so, you know, at the edge of whatever that people will always remember you. But if you think about U2, if you think about Zeppelin, you think about Jimmy Page. Like you might think of Plant first, but Jimmy Page is on equal footing for sure. Yeah. If you think about U2, you know Bono, you could probably think of The Edge. Can't name the other two. I can't. I really can't. I just, I don't know. I have always had this weird kind of grudge against U2, mainly because of The Edge, and then Bono's kind of phony humanitarianism. But yeah, I mean, you know, he claims to be concerned about the environment, which is good. I mean, I'm all for that. I believe in environmentalism. I think it's important to be conscious of that. But, you know, then there's a story where they were playing a gig in like Berlin or something, and Bono forgot his favorite pair of shoes and had them flown in from Ireland. It's come on, man. Anyway, but that's all I'll say about U2. I don't mind the music. I like everything I've learned about U2. The people has made me like them less. I haven't heard one fact that I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? That makes me appreciate them.
That in the early 2000s, they were like the biggest successful touring group of the time.
It's insane.
That's nuts. When I read that, just the other day I read that and I was like, that's crazy. I would have never guessed that.
Yeah.
Anyways,
that Octung Baby album came out when I was in high school, and I never could get past on the song Vertigo, how it starts uno, dos, tres, catorce, which I believe would be 1, 2, 3, 14.
Yeah, it is 14. What?
Yeah, and so it's like I don't speak fluent Spanish, but I can count to 14 at least, and and I know catorce is 14. But I'm also not a mathematician, but I know 14 doesn't come right after 3. But anyway, okay, off the soapbox.
We'll ease up on YouTube now. Moving back to the original. So the next track is "Your Time Is Gonna Come," which is the beginning of the second half,
right?
Or side B.
There's not a whole lot to this one. It is a Zepp original, which is kind of nice.
I had a comment about that though.
Well, yeah. But I like it. I think that the best thing that the song does is serve as the lead in to Black Mountainside. But I do like the song. I like it a lot.
Why do you say that though?
I don't know. I think how Black Mountainside starts with the fade out from "Your Time Is Gonna Come" is nice. But to me, what "Your Time Is Gonna Come" sounds like Led Zeppelin trying to write a hit. And there's a little, it's almost like on Led Zeppelin 2, they have the "Livin', Lovin', Made" that follows "Heartbreaker." And that sounds like them trying to write a hit. And that's just not.
Well, that's also, because I love to think about, because in modern times, people don't consider like the lineup of an album, but if you consider it in a physical medium, it's a different experience. So you like side A is more positive and side B is the heavier or slower stuff. There's a lot of expectation that people build up for that type of planning. But like when you think of Sgt. Pepper, they specifically put "Within You, Without You" as the first track on side B, so it'd be easier to skip if people didn't like it.
Right.
Because they thought it was cool, but they knew with the sitar and the more just a lack of awareness of that kind of music in the culture at the time. There was like, people are probably going to want to skip that, so let's put it at the beginning. But you had to consider that. So I feel like with this album, that might have been the idea, is this is a little more commercial, because it does the, what did I write down? It's got that more classic 60s rock, like a choir or like that multi-vocal chorus where everyone's singing together. And like, I can't think of, like it's the time of the season, or no, what's this? I'm trying to think of like a 60s song. But then there's a bunch of them like that where the chorus is sung by a group, and that's like, it adds to the impact of the song. But yeah, I agree with you. This one, because it's a great song. It is.
It sounds like an early Yardbirds song. It sounds like a Clapton Yardbirds song to me.
Yeah, it does. This was the comment I was going to make though about you saying it's original.
Yeah, with quotes.
Is what it's so the. Well, I guess it's the guitar.
Yeah, Dear Mr. Fantasy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to. Because as soon as I heard this song, because I was driving and listening to this song. I know I've heard the song before, but again, it was fleeting. It was kind of like in the background. But this was my first, real serious listen. And I heard it in the house, and then I was driving, and then it started to play, and then that part came in, and I was like, wait a second.
Yeah,
that's Traffic.
Yeah, yes.
And so I looked up the release date, and I was kicking myself because I was like at work and doing all these multiple things at random times. I'd be like, I gotta look it up. When did Traffic release Dear Mr. Fantasy? Was it 69 or 68? I can't remember. And it was prior.
Right.
It was before. And what's really interesting is I want to look more into it. I should have, but I wonder if Page or Jones, if they were big fans of theirs or really liked that album, because even if they just heard the single Dear Mr. Fantasy, that song also houses a lot of what would be known as a kind of a Zeppelin sound, because it has Dear Mr. Fantasy, it has harmonica, right?
Oh yeah,
it's got that distorted vocal, yeah, and and a guitar solo and organ and all that kind of stuff like that. But it's very interesting. I for whatever reason, I thought that those songs maybe released almost in tandem, but it was an exact year prior that Traffic had released that song.
Right. And I just looked it up to make sure that I was going to get this right. Steve Winwood did help write Dear Mr. Fantasy. And Steve Winwood is another one of those guys who kind of got lumped in with that Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page crowd of guitarists back then. Obviously different circles and stuff, but guys who were about the same age, who played very similar styles.
Yeah. Well, and they're also bopping around, jumping to different groups and just collaborating. And like we said, these weren't, they were established, but they weren't self businesses.
Right.
So it's like when I give you something, or if we work on something together and then we leave the house and then go to different bands and then finish the same project, not knowing, it's like, then it's just by word. It's just by honor, But are you aware of any kind of like legal thing about that one or anything?
I looked for it because I thought the same thing you did.
Yeah.
Like that was the first time I listened to this album all the way through for the first time in a couple of years, probably about a week ago. I've heard all the songs individually, but listening to it all the way through, like you were saying, there's something different about it. Mm-hmm. And it was the same thing. Like I thought that I had accidentally skipped to a Traffic album on my iTunes for a second. And then I was like, oh, no, I forgot. It just kind of sounds like this.
Yeah.
And I looked, I couldn't find anything. And I don't know if it was just kind of a, like some form of honor among the musicians or, for all I know, Jimmy Page and Steve Winwood, got loaded one night and started playing it. And they were both like, hey, this kind of sounds good. And they were like, okay, well, you use it, I'll use it. And we just never speak of it again.
Yeah. Or is it some kind of like old school, like blues standard?
Oh, it could be
something.
Yeah.
Because, wasn't it Stairway to Heaven that there was a certain part of it they couldn't sue for because it's technically like some kind of scale or standard that's not.
Yeah,
like you didn't write that. You just played how the progression goes or whatever.
Yeah, it's that very beginning, that ding 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 ding. Another thing that'll sound great on the show. But yeah, because all you're doing is it's almost a pentatonic scale of whatever chord that is that's being played.
So I wonder if that's similar. But anyways, my ears immediately perked up.
Yeah.
Because I love Dear Mr. Fantasy. That is a phenomenal song.
I do too. And I am, since we are talking about Led Zeppelin, I did the logical thing and wore my tie-dye Grateful Dead shirt to do the recording. But Jerry Garcia and the Dead as a whole covered Dear Mr. Fantasy a lot and did it a good service. And so
that's a great track.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's crazy. Yeah, I just, for whatever reason, I thought, and I know Winwood was with a lot of people, but but Winwood, especially at that time, 68, he was, 68, 69, he had gone through a couple of groups and he was jamming with a lot of people.
Right.
A lot of people, even Hendrix, on Highway Child. He's the organist on that.
Yeah.
For Voodoo Child, he was jamming with them when they came up with that.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
And
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's just because Mitch Mitchell liked to jam. The bassist, I'm forgetting his name in The Experience.
Yeah.
He didn't. He was more traditional session musician where it's like, let's come in, let's write something, you tell me what to play, and we'll work it out. He didn't like to just go in and let's just play, let's just mess around. That's not that he just wasn't about that as a musician.
Right.
And so that's why people like Winwood would come into the mix with them sometime with The Experience, is because they just wanted to jam and flesh things out. Which some of those jams eventually, that's what ended up on, what's the album that came out post his death, whatever, that album that comes out in 71 or whatever, Freedom or
I think it was called Freedom, wasn't it?
Like a lot of that is just jams that he didn't finish, but they were just coming up with. But anyways, like Winwood was in that mix, but that makes total sense. If he's with an experimental blues rock person like Hendrix, I'm sure he's in those crowds with Beck and Page and who knows what cross-pollination happens with that. But anyways,
Noel Redding, by the way, was the bassist. That was going to bug me. And I could remember Noel, but I couldn't remember Redding, and Noel doesn't narrow it down enough. So Noel Redding, bassist for the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
But just very interesting. I don't know. So if you like Dear Mr. Fantasy, I can guarantee you'll love this song.
Yeah. And it does have a fade out, and the fade out begins the next song, Black Mountainside. Another one that had a little bit of litigation surrounding it.
Yeah, because this was a folk song.
It was by a Scottish folk artist named Bert Jansch. And I did look that up because I thought it would be pronounced differently, but apparently he pronounced it with a hard J, Jansch. Apparently the more common way is Jansch.
Oh, okay. And it's a different name though, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, it's called Down by Blackwaterside.
Yeah.
Blackwaterside all being one word, which is kind of interesting, very Germanic.
And the only thing I really have on this one is that the only reason why Page had this in his head was because the Yardbirds would play that song.
Right. And Bert Jansch wrote lyrics for it. And this is one that there was no actual lawsuit filed, but there was some sort of discussion. And I believe I'm kicking myself because apparently I didn't write it down, but I believe that it's another one of those things that on reissues in the 90s, it started saying, Jimmy Page as arranged by Bert Jansch or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he was a Scottish folk artist, and I guess Scotland only had enough for one folk artist because I had never heard of him. The only Scottish folk artist I can name is Donovan. So I guess, I guess that town ain't big enough for the both of them. But it's a good song. I mean, it's short, it's instrumental. Yeah. It's Jimmy Page showing off a little bit, which is always nice. So but it's a good track. I mean, it's kind of, it fills the gap between Your Time Is Gonna Come and Communication Breakdown beautifully. And the one weird part about Black Mountainside to me is the way it ends, because it just stops. There's no kind of winding down. It's just, there's a note and then there's silence.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's like, again, the concept of the second side.
Right.
It's like it's going to be a little more easy, a little somber. We're going to build it up. We're going to have a multi-vocal, arrangement when we're singing the first song, and it's more poppy maybe. It's a little more like, not like angsty, it's not high energy, it's just smooth, and we're singing together, and then you go into a quick instrumental, so it's like it's flowing, and then they're like, but let me remind you what else we can do. And then hit you hard with the communication breakdown.
Yeah. And Led Zeppelin gets a lot of what we were talking about this before the show. They get a lot of kind of misplaced credit for inventing heavy metal, but they might have accidentally invented punk rock with Communication Breakdown. And it's if we're moving on, are we moving on? Yeah, because I don't know how much more I could talk about Black Mountainside. But Communication Breakdown, a lot of downstrokes, what we would now call power chords in a lot of it, and Johnny Ramone, or one of the Ramones, has even said that Communication Breakdown is what inspired kind of that whole Ramones sound. Yeah. And, and it's not hard to hear. You listen to Communication Breakdown, and then you listen to I Want to Be Sedated or Rock and Roll High School or any of the other Ramones songs. And, the Ramones are kind of considered fathers of punk in some way, than the Stooges to some extent.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely got that proto-punk
it does.
Beat and guitar, that fast guitar, that what would you call it? Like that not headbanging, but the robotic. The power chords. That's what you.
Right. It sounds like an early Sex Pistols song to me.
Yeah. Well, and because let me see. This is early '69. Because I'm trying to think of like what else you would think of like that. What would be proto-punk? And it would also be like late '69, which would be Bowie's first album, The Man Who Sold the World, which is primarily Ronson giving that proto-punk vibe off, just because of his style, which was just that palpable high energy, just like because I call it like that primal ground. It's just like whatever he's playing, it's just what is that? But it was so fast, playing the power chords, going crazy fast. Because this is that development of that high tempo, hard hitting sound that would be considered punk, and then like I guess it would have been about the same year or the year after, you have people like MC5 popping up and stuff like that, really honing in on certain parts of that sound. Because I mean, that's how you develop a genre. Is like, one genre does something a little bit different, and then someone hears that and they like what's different about it, and they just cut out the rest. I'm like, I want that.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right, and I agree. And even on that Bowie album, the title track, "Man Who Sold the World," that riff in that. And I'm not going to do it because I've already blown everyone's ears out twice now. But it sounds like a slowed down punk progression. Is what it is, and it's not a slow song by any means, but punk is normally really fast. But that riff in "The Man Who Sold the World,"
well, yeah, and that whole album,
and the whole album's like that.
But it's like the beginnings of that. It's like you can pick up on it, but man, by the time you get to Hunky Dory, like listening to like Queen Bitch, and especially by the time you're on Ziggy, I mean. That's what and they became the Spiders from Mars. I mean, that group of musicians, they didn't even realize it, because at Hunky Dory, they composed a lot of that using the piano first.
Right.
And so half the album is slower and the other half is like this proto-punk thing. And it's like, where are we going here? Because the first album, "Man Who Sold the World," it's like a lot of it's rock, proto-punk, intense high rock, which I think comes from Zeppelin maybe shaking the dust off of people in the beginning of the year. And you have like a young Ronson and a Bowie. It's like wanting to turn heads and do something a little bit different. So like, let's hit it harder. Let's do something crazy. And then they come to the next album and they're like, well, let's mix it up. Let's do the traditional stuff using piano, and we'll do some of that high energy stuff. And then by the time you get to Ziggy, it's just all high energy.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely the beginning of that, and commercial acceptance of that too. Of like, if you bust in with that high energy, crazy sound, it's like, as long as it's marketed or it gets played or in your touring, it's like you'll develop something.
Oh yeah, and I'll try and blow your mind. I don't know if it's going to, but early rock and roll songs and early rock and roll singers were piano based. Right? Fats Domino, Chubby Checker, Little Richard.
Yeah.
Those guys wrote songs on pianos, but they sounded like punk songs. If you think about a Fats Domino song where it's a lot of very heavy-handed, fast chords, that sounds like punk. The problem is then you get into the 60s and people start writing songs on guitars and having more folk influence and that kind of stuff. And then you get back to punk, and a lot of punk and even Communication Breakdown, if we're going to include that kind of as a punk song, it sounds like you're playing those heavy-handed, fast 50s rock and roll piano riffs, but on a guitar.
Yeah. Well, it's like we were talking about before. You translate it to a different instrument. Right. You might just go into another genre on accident.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's weird to think that like Chubby Checker and Fats Domino might really be the more immediate precursors to the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Ramones and people like that. But you've said it. I don't need to repeat it, but it's just, that's what music is. That's what music evolution is. Yeah. And it's like you said, it's how those new genres are born.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why none of it's like pinpointable. None of it's like, oh, and this is the origins of that. Right. Unless like you the first person to use an instrument like ever. Yeah.
It's just someone writes a song on a theremin or something. You're like, oh, okay, I can kind of see that.
Yeah. But like the only documented first use of like synthesizer, just stupid random things. But yeah, no, for sure. But this song is just it's so high energy. And I know this is like one of the ones they love to do live too, and it would just go nuts. I mean, the guitar solos would run long. They would tag team it. You do your solo, I'll do my part. But it's and this is one of those songs that you can hear the bass so clear. Oh, yeah. And that bass line is so solid. Like it's and like what you said, I think that really, it probably is a part of the composition of it. Is Page knew that this isn't just another bass guy who's casual. It's like, if he's doing it, so and they probably understand what he's playing or can expect what he's going to play, but he's going to do it well. He's going to execute it with power, and it's not. He's going to project. It's not just going to be a passive thing in the background. And so, like with this song, I mean, you can hear it. I mean, it's great. I just wanted to make sure to point that out, because it's definitely one of the tracks that you can hear him really well, and he's great foundation for a bass. And this song is more of that, I don't know, that cocky rock. It's more like, proud rock.
Yeah,
kind of
there's a swagger to it.
Yeah, it's got that, what the Rolling Stones, kind of project. This song to me is almost like a high energy, like the height of their energy Rolling Stones, but with a drummer like Mitch Mitchell.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, you combine that, this is that song for sure.
And again, nothing against Charlie Waters, great jazz drummer and a great Rolling Stones member from the early days, I believe. But good as Charlie Waters was, he's not John Bonham and he's not Mitch Mitchell. This was Communication Breakdown was the B-side of the single. It was the flip side of Good Times, Bad Times. And something I kind of thought interesting, I'd never really thought about it, although it makes sense. So this was played in the main set of every single documented concert that Led Zeppelin did between the release of the album in 1970. And then in 1970, it switched and became an encore piece and was an encore piece for almost every single Zeppelin concert from 1970 until Bonham died. And so it's pretty interesting. And they would, they would throw stuff in the middle, or like in the BBC sessions, they recorded 3 separate versions and each one is just a little tweaked. But I think this was a song that the 4 of them enjoyed playing. And I think it gave each member a chance to shine a little bit in a way that flowed well.
Yeah. Well, it's just like, and I think it's composed that way. Like, just like Queen developed songs that would be good for concert members to sing along to and interact with each other. But like this is how, when we play, we'll hand the spotlight off. This is where we're going to shine, because I mean, to me, this song is where they, at least in the beginnings, this is where they get thrown into the Black Sabbath, into the heavy metal side. Because, I mean, Page's face melting, I mean, it's just, it's madness. I mean, the speed and the variety, I mean, he's just killer. And so, especially first album, you're still in the 60s. I mean, I could definitely see how people would hear how he's playing the guitar and just being like, why is that? Like that's like rock times 2. And I don't know if I like that. Like certain people, I'm sure, were just like, because I mean, and this is different ways of appreciating music. But I'm sure there were some people that just couldn't keep up. So they're just like, I don't know how to appreciate that. Like, what is that? I don't like that. I can't expect that. Like, that's not rock to me. That's not music to me.
Yeah.
And that's why I could definitely see how, like, people that are on the lighter side of music, they would perceive that as being like, that's heavy metal. That's like otherworldly, demonic, or whatever, just because it was so like crazy. I mean, it's madness.
It brought out the "get off my lawn" in a lot of people. I think it brought that out in a lot of people. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
but I mean, that's what it is, though. I mean, it's
I agree.
It's like if you want to kind of think of the epitome of rock evolving to the point of being like annoying to a previous generation. It's like, this is one of the ones that would have been like, if you thought Beatles like Revolution was like, that's so hard, I don't like that, or Helter Skelter. Check this out.
if you think about some guy who'd been an infantryman on Normandy or whatever, and their idea of kicking back is listening to Glenn Miller a little bit louder than normal, and then they hear this, after you hear Chattanooga Choo Choo enough times, and then you hear Communication Breakdown, you're gonna blow a circuit. I mean, that's all it is.
Or to the people that found I Want to Hold Your Hand offensive because it was electric, or because it was electric using folk chords, if you're that particular, it's like, what is this to you? Like, good Lord, I can imagine why this is so disrupting. Yeah. And so, like, I don't know, off-putting to certain people, but also attractive to others, because it was like, how are you getting that sound? How are you that fast? How are But I think that kind of becomes what this band started to do, is just like the Beatles mastered music and kind of because I heard a lot of musicians describe the way the Beatles did music as almost showing people how to make music. And how to appreciate it, and how to appreciate different types of music by just doing it in simple ways, but new ways.
Yeah. Formulaic, but not unoriginal.
Right. But with Zeppelin, it was like, okay, so we know what that is, but what's next? Like what's going to be just like, if you want to understand it, you have to put in some work. What's the next level of complexity? That's what they are to me. And it's very interesting that in a lot of interviews too, that people, it's obviously in the UK, they projected that onto them. It's like, okay, the Beatles are gone. So are you have that next generation sound? Are you the next, Beatle group? Are you the next group that leads the charge of what's to come or whatever? And it was interesting because you could tell that they were asked that multiple times. Every time they were asked that, they're like, they didn't know what to do with that. And we'll see. I don't know, But to their credit, they did last longer.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they did.
but yeah, anyways, that's that song though, Communication Breakdown. I just feel like that's the centerpiece in the beginning of why people were like putting them in the same field as Sabbath and folks like that. But whatever. That's all I got on that one.
Yeah, so moving on. Track 8, the penultimate song, I Can't Quit You, Baby. Another Willie Dixon number that, again, was actually properly credited to Willie Dixon. So Jimmy Page apparently knew that you were supposed to do that if you stole stuff. But this is another one of those that's just, it's very typical of kind of the blues foundational stuff in the late 60s.
For sure.
I love this song. I love every version of it I've ever heard that they did. This was another one that was a live staple standalone, and then kind of became a part of the Whole Lotta Love medley as they progressed. And so in the especially in the mid 70s, when they would make Whole Lotta Love a 17 or 18 minute thing.
A lot of moaning.
Yeah, right. You have a 45-minute version of Moby Dick followed by a 20-minute version of I Can't Quit You, Baby, with a bunch of weird moaning in it.
30 minutes of Plant just moaning.
Yeah. It's amazing that guy can talk anymore with how abusive he was to his vocal cords, right?
Well, it's funny when they talk about the O2 Arena reunion thing that they did in the early 2000s, about how scared they were about coming together and meeting the expectation of everybody, and like they're like, oh, are you going to tour again when you start there? And like Plant being like, I don't know if I can be the howling sex god, the Viking god, every night.
I saw Robert Plant and Alison Krauss in Austin one time, and his stage presence is it's similar. It's almost the same. It's still a lot of like hand gestures and weird kind of movement, theatrical. But everything's an octave lower. Everything is slower. He doesn't scream anymore. And they, with Alison Krauss, they're playing bluegrass versions of Black Dog and that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But instead of really hitting those high notes, it's
you can only go so long.
Right. Even in Black Dog, even the "Hey Baby" parts, it's with Alison Krauss, it's "Hey baby, pretty baby," it's just.
Well, and I mean, at that time, you're wearing your voice out, but it's expected that you're smoking like all the time.
Yeah.
Which I can only imagine that's running out.
Yeah, I definitely 3 packs a day of unfiltered Luckies can't be good for you.
Well,
I'm no doctor.
But that's a mind-blowing thing when you look at the like Let It Be or Get Back session like stuff, when you have Paul doing some of his best vocals, but then you show them in the studio and they're like, they're the producers, they're on the tables, they're on the mixers, and they're doing their thing. But then while they're writing, in between everything they're doing, they got a cigarette in their mouth and they're like, hey, give me another. They're just like constantly. And it's like, dang, well, that was just the thing.
Yeah. I have heard, I don't know if this is true. So please, no one take this as gold, but I had heard that Motley Crue, just speaking of craziness on tours, that when they would tour, when they had a U.S. tour, they would bring 5,000 cartons of cigarettes. And a carton is 10 boxes, and each box has 20 cigarettes in it.
Good Lord.
So it's 5,000 times 200, and that's a lot of cigarettes.
Isn't that 1 million?
Is it? Yeah, probably. I don't know. I don't
did the quick math, but that's a lot.
I don't do math.
That's a lot.
I'm an English history guy, not a math science guy.
I'm just a talk show.
Yeah.
But no, that's nuts. But it's such a crazy habit, of the era of the time.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. I mean, I can imagine. I mean, Paul's done the same thing. There's certain he has access now to play anything from the Beatles catalog, anything from Wings, but he stays away, from certain ones because he just knows he can't do it.
Yeah.
You just gotta adapt. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I nothing against them, but anyways, yeah. But I just find it interesting that at the time, I mean, they were expected to pump it out, have all those habits, and just keep on trucking. I know it was an age of excess where they were just making money left and right and just doing whatever. It's going to take a toll eventually. But anyways, it's a great song. But yeah, anyways, and we're on I Can't Quit You, Babe. This song, I really like this one because it's that classic blues, like slow ballad type of deal, but it's got those fills at the ends that are Zeppelin. So it's blues and it feels kind of traditional, okay. And then whenever they would do those little fills at the end of the measures, it's like that's Zeppelin. They would go back into it. But that's just great. That's them adding that Zepp spice to it.
Oh yeah. And Bonham, it became such a staple. Anyone who is even halfway a rock and roll connoisseur of anything, you can always pick out Bonham's drums. I mean, it's such a signature sound, and there are other drummers like that. You can pick out Neil Peart, you can pick out Keith Moon sometimes when he wasn't too messed up to play. But Bonham, you're right. This is a lot of those fills are very. They're what would become Bonham staples, and you would hear them in their inversions in other songs, and that is adding that Zeppelin flair to a Willie Dixon song.
Yeah, awesome. You want to start?
Yeah. So leading in, this is the very last song on the album, track 9, or the 5th track of side 2, if you want to get into it that way. It is How Many More Times. It's the longest song on the album, and it's a
little over 8 minutes.
Yeah, it's just over 8 minutes. This is kind of an interesting one as far as writing credits go, because it was credited to Zeppelin, but it's pretty much accepted that it's kind of an amalgamation of ripoffs.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So some of the riffs came from Albert King. And some of it came from Jeff Beck. There's a little bit of Beck's Bolero in there, which Jimmy Page did right, but Jeff Beck made his own.
Yes, yeah. It's like Jimmy Page wrote it the year prior, gave it to Beck, and helped him play it.
Right.
And then a year later, he's like, I want to throw that in the middle of mine.
Right. And then, but
and it's the Bolero.
Right. The biggest ripoff in this song, though, is actually the lyrical content. A lot of this came from various Howlin' Wolf songs, and Howlin' Wolf was eventually credited on the album in re-releases. But it's kind of interesting because, I think that Robert Plant, who was credited as the lyricist originally, I think Robert Plant kind of had this idea that if you throw enough kind of blues tropes into the lyrics, that, because a lot of blues songs have very similar lyrical content, right?
Yeah. And
I think Plant's thinking was, well, if I steal from someone who stole from someone who stole from someone,
just wash it out.
Right. Yeah. And, I agree with the spirit of that. I disagree with the ultimate result. I mean,
calling it original.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can steal all you want. Just don't call it your own, I guess, when it comes to that kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
And this is also another song that features a bowed guitar, which is kind of interesting. It's, Dazed and Confused gets all the credit for that. But How Many More Times has a bow in it.
Yeah. And I like this one because it's I guess some of it also has some jazz influence, but this one is the most obvious. I mean, right from the get, you have that jazz bass line and the bottom drum line. But I just love it because it's got that. I don't know, and with that weird guitar. I mean, it's a good approach to another one of their foundations, the jazz foundation, while adding in the weird guitar ad libs and stylings that would, really make it sound like them. But it's also just a long piece, so it goes through so many different forms and changes that it does play out, like we were talking about earlier. It does play out more like a jazz song because it's long. It's got a lot of different changes, a lot of different arrangements. I don't know. That's why I like this one for the ending.
I do too. I think it's a great track to end on. I agree with you. It's got that powerful kind of jazz beat up on the ride.
Mm-hmm.
Normally you would expect a very heavy-handed hi-hat in a song like this, but instead it's kind of lighter and it's played up on the ride for a lot of it.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this song is, and this is my favorite song on the album, so we've gotten to that. It's my favorite song on the album. I just love it. What's interesting, though, as far as its concert history, is I was reading about it. So again, this was a staple until about 1970. So basically for Led Zeppelin 1 and Led Zeppelin 2, those albums were played in their, almost in their entirety.
Sure. You only have so
as the
much
concert pieces, right? Then Led Zeppelin 3 came out in 1970 or 1971 and was more acoustic based. And then, of course, you have 4 coming out. And 4's got Stairway, Going to California, 4 Sticks, Battle of Evermore, Black Dog. It's got, what would become most
stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And this song really kind of fell out after Led Zeppelin 3 came out. And it was played very, very, very sporadically after that and was never really a regular part of the show.
Well, and that's kind of and I think that's where that, I don't want to say false perception of where they come from or what their foundations are, but kind of like, because they start to turn it to the more commercial, successful stuff,
right?
Which is that Zeppelin 4, Immigrant Song, there's that high energy rock stuff. But then you're missing out on this and the You Shook Me and the which is it is slower, it's a little bit different, but it's still them.
It's still them.
Yeah, but it's very, very different, and so I feel like that's. Again, maybe they lose it. They lose that reference point of wanting to build off of their foundations, and now they're just building off of what they've become, and just chugging along with that momentum. But that's why I like this song. And I Can't Quit You, Babe, and You Shook Me is because it's still that great core blues jazz sound, which. I love that.
Oh, I do too.
You can't ever, it's hard to make that sound bad unless you're just bad at what you're doing.
Right, exactly.
but yeah, that's got to be it. That they, they just saw what was evolving from the audience point of view, and I don't know, maybe just gave into that. But you can see that that's their, that's where the respect comes from. That's where the inspiration comes from.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the blues. Like it's hard to, I wish I could give credit because I don't know who said this. It wasn't me. I'll do that. I'll give that disclaimer. But someone once said that to make the blues, you need soul and you need skill, and you can make up for a lack of skill with more soul, but you can never make up for a lack of soul with more skill. And I think that this album with those blues heavy tracks, You Shook Me, I Can't Quit You, how many more times? I think that Zeppelin was one of those, and a lot of it has to do with Plant's energy as a singer. A lot of the Zeppelin songs had that kind of soul and passion that is what makes the blues such an easy genre of music to listen to and an enjoyable genre of music to listen to.
Well, it's that palpable energy.
It is. And the blues was brought up in poor African-American communities in the United States where people did not always have access to the best instruments and the best training. So it's supposed to be somewhat simplistic and serve as building blocks of things. And if you look, American music, for whatever that is, really, they said that jazz was the true American art form, right? And jazz was spawned from kind of blues and bluegrass. And then they all kind of went their separate ways with their similarities and their differences. But the blues has served as such a building block for all rock and roll as we know it. I mean,
absolutely.
Going back to the origins with Little Richard, and then you get with Elvis, where you're kind of bringing rock and roll to a more mainstream audience.
Which was also in Elvis. Elvis's existence was literally a translation from a black artist to a white musician to get more commercial success. That's literally why Elvis was put where he was.
Yeah.
Which isn't crazy. That's who Otis Blackwell was. So he wrote like all of Elvis's early hits that got him fame. That was him.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Or to quote music icon Eminem, he did say, I am the worst thing since Elvis Presley to do black music so selfishly. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do it in rhythm because I don't want to embarrass myself too much. But I think
your hat's on back.
Yeah, I know. Like I already feel like I look like Fred Durst. And that's bad enough for me. But oh man, my wife's never going to find me attractive again. But I think that's what it is, and then that's why the blues serves as such a great foundational block of that kind of stuff. Is you have stuff that is simple and passionate that can be built upon so easily. Yeah, and you can't learn or you can't train that soul approach to singing or wanting to exude something or get across a feeling. It's like a good speaker, and it's like sometimes when you're a really good speaker, you don't need to write it all down, you don't need to have it all fleshed out. You just have the general idea of what's going on, and your personality and character dynamics fill in the gap. Yep. And that's why you can't teach it, is because it's just something that I've admired, observed, built on, practiced in my own time, and then now is the presentable moment to do it, to belt, to experiment, to screech how. Be a Janis Joplin, be someone that's gonna take an approach that's gonna relate to someone. Right. So, I mean that is music. Music is you composing something that you feel to communicate to someone else, to communicate that feeling to someone else, and that's why blues is such a. That's why you have a lot of committed fans of blues, right? It's because it's you feel it. It's not just. That's great timing. That's a great little song. It's like most blues songs, like when you hear it, you don't just hear it, you feel it. Right. And it's because it's relatable. It's because because of the structure of the songs. The notes you're playing, a lot of times it's that it's going to put you in that mood of self-reflection, of there's an inherent vulnerability to it. Yeah. And I think when, not to get too Dr. Phil on people here, but I think when you can hear other people being vulnerable in such a passionate and enjoyable way, it can bring that out in yourself where you do get that introspective kind of feeling. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you listen to one bourbon, one scotch, and one beer and suddenly you're crying your eyes out and talking about stuff, but it's there. You hear it, you can hear the passion, you can feel the passion, and that's the more important thing. And it is why music is a billion and billion and billion and billion dollar industry. Yeah. Is because people love having some sort of external influence on their internal self. Yeah. And finding something that can make you think harder about anything, I think is worth getting into. I mean, if it leaves an impression, it has some kind of power behind it. And as everybody says, knowledge is power. But if you want to have your own power, it's good to have your own knowledge and your own, structure. Right. And so it's like, I can appreciate it. This is one thing I talk about a lot is anybody can judge anything. You might not have ever tasted a peanut butter jelly sandwich, but you could judge one. Right. Yeah. So anyone could do it without sensation, without experienced sensation. And to become a maker or a creator or an appreciator of an art form, you have to know more about it. And I think that's the warm or the really relatable
approach of a genre like blues is you're already halfway there. They're talking about topics, or they're playing in a style that already puts you in that mood that you've been in before, that we've all been in before. Because I think that's, like a lot of pop music, it's popular, it's high energy and stuff like that. But then there's other music that people are drawn to because it's relatable to, I know there's stuff like memory, chunking and memory development of like, I remember listening to this album in college when things were so hard, blah, blah. But there's also just hearing that song and the message or the story that's been, put in front of you and being able to relate to it just because you're human.
Yeah.
Just because it's something that we all go through, and it's because it's a dark time that we've all been through, or someone that, like in blues, it's so traditional, or it's like someone did you wrong, a relationship that was, toxic, whatever it could be. But that's, the negative stuff might not be as marketable, but it's just as relatable.
Yeah.
And I think that's always been the power behind blues, and why it can leave a strong impression on people is because they've already had that impression from something else. They already have that footprint, that handprint on their soul. All you're doing is highlighting it again,
right?
And showing them that they're. And I think that again, that's another draw to it, or heavy dark metal, for whatever you want to talk about. People are drawn to that because they relate to it. And I talked about this in the last episode, where that's when you have to start to be careful. It's because music still has power, and it's not magic. It's just impressions, and it's music impressing upon you. And that if you bring on a darker song, you bring on something that isn't going to build a culture of what you are or what you're trying to be as a character, as a person, an individual, then it can, it'll take you different places. But I mean, that's the double-sided sword nature of music. But again, just getting back into blues and while we're here at Zeppelin, I think that was a big part of their impact, is they respected that. They respected the power behind blues, the power behind all their knowledge of music, but they wanted to make it have even more of an impression, have even more of an impact, that when you listen to it, it's not just gonna, I can relate to that. It's also gonna make you not know how to relate to it because of the crazy stylings that they're using, while still using relatable messages, lyrics, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's, the Led Zeppelin, like every band, evolved. And when you start getting towards the end, towards In Through the Outdoor and Presence, and even Coda to some extent, it's a lot of the same themes. It's a lot of the same kind of self-reflective impact, just done in a different way. And if you strip it all down, the blues is still there. But, by this time they had synthesizers, and they had different types of production, and they had more access to things, more money to make the albums. But you strip it all down, it's all the same. It's kind of this whole, we're all human. We all have the same things. And not to be too much of a downer here, but one way or another, I mean, you're going to end up in the ground. So it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that this album is, and particularly this album, it's that unapologetic kind of sound, that rough blues approach, and that reality of life, of like the hard moments, the weird moments, the uncomfortable things, and the excitement.
Yeah. I want to thank our sponsors, Zoloft and Prozac. Just kidding. Please don't sue. Don't sue Sam, especially, but also don't sue me.
But yeah, I don't know. It's a great rock album. It's a great blues album. I don't know.
And one of the truly great debut albums in the history of rock and roll. Yeah. I really do. I mean, and again, you know how much I love the Beatles, but I think if I was ranking debut albums, I take this over Please Please Me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, and it's just crazy because casually trying to double think of what anybody else had, like a explosive debut, but I mean, it wasn't just that they had a good debut album. I mean, half of that album are like classic tracks of theirs, so it's not just like they had I Saw Her Standing There, and that's the one that really has held all these years. It's like now they too are like have that album for like the whole time they were together.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it wasn't just
Yeah.
just like communication breakdown. That's the ticket. It was like half that album is still good, man.
Well, and again, except for that period where Jimmy Page had broken his finger, Dazed and Confused was played at every single concert, except those like 5 when he physically was incapable of doing it.
Yeah.
Communication Breakdown, same way. You Shook Me was a staple. It is weird. They didn't play Good Times, Bad Times live much, but it's such a complicated song. I mean, they going back to what you were talking about with Rock Band and Guitar Hero, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Someone had approached Jimmy Page about having a Led Zeppelin rock band like the Beatles had, and they said, well, what about just the first album? And Jimmy Page said, I don't think anyone could play the drum parts on Rock Band.
Oh, wow.
And and maybe that's why they never really played it live much, but it is, but you're exactly right.
I also feel like that might just be also trying to play into the legend.
Well, yeah, maybe so.
Because, there's some songs on Rock Band that are absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
And you need the double, because you can have 2 bass kick drum pedals.
Oh, can you really?
Yeah, yeah. And there's some of them you need it. And there's no way you're going to do it without that.
Yeah.
But I feel like that might just be them trying to maintain their legacy. But still, Rabbit Foot, he was mad.
Yeah.
Watching some of that footage is nuts of him on a traditional like jazz set, just going like, crazy. Like
it's insane.
Because there's like a time where Hendrix saw them play, and that's what he called that's what he called Bonham was Rabbit Foot.
Yeah.
It's like your foot was going nuts up there. Like what?
Yeah. And that's, there were other guys just as fast. Neil Peart. No one can deny that Neil Peart was a phenomenal drummer. I know Rush isn't for everyone.
Yeah. He's a monster. Mitchell was
and Mitch Mitchell's the same way, Keith Moon to some extent, but
what's
no one does it like Bonzo.
Who's the Doors drummer? I always forget his name. I always feel bad about that.
Yeah, I can't remember. That's an album. That's a band we need to cover sometimes, because that will force me to relearn a bunch of stuff I used to know.
Yeah, we should.
The one name that I can always remember besides Jim Morrison is Ray Manzarek, because it's such a fun name to say.
Well, I'm glad you're saying this right now, because it gives me a chance to say one of the things that I like to bring up as a music person is I think Robbie Krieger, the guitarist for the Doors, is one of the most underappreciated guitarists of all time.
I would agree with that. I think you're right.
He's phenomenal. I know this is a Zeppelin thing and a weird thing to kind of wrap up on, but he had only been taught the guitar for 6 months prior to joining the Doors.
Yeah.
Never used a guitar pick, always picked it with his fingers and used the bottleneck slide that he made. And that was it. That was it. He came up with Light My Fire. It was just always interesting that he was kind of the greenest person in the band. Besides Morrison.
Right.
But then his stylings, in their songs, were just so unique and so that's the Doors. It's like, no, that's freaking Robbie Krieger.
Yeah, you can pick them out. That's for sure.
Yeah,
pick him out, I should say.
Yeah, he's really good. How did we get here?
I don't know. The point is, if you love Led Zeppelin, listen to Morrison Hotel.
That is true. That's a good blues tangent of the Doors. They have some blues stuff in and out of their stuff, but that's a great one. Roadhouse Blues is always a classic.
Yeah.
But anyways, anything else to add for Zeppelin? You're the bigger Zeppelin fan in the room.
No, I just thanks for having me again. It's been a blast. We need to keep doing it.
Yeah,
it's so much fun.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Like I said too, it's been great to have a serious approach to either a piece of work or to an artist and to understand them a little bit more, or the world that they inherited, or that the era they went through. Because we're on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
So especially 50 years.
Oh yeah.
So it's just total different world.
My dad was in first grade when this album came out, so I was a long way off.
Yeah. I think my dad was like 10 when this album came out. Yeah. Yeah, but still, yeah, it's a phenomenal album. Very happy that we went through it because I definitely do have a better understanding and a deeper appreciation. For sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome.
Great album. Great work.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, until next time. Thank you for listening. For more episodes, visit our website, musicmythpodcast.com, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Goodbye.